Hello, you are watching the Supply Chain Digital Show, brought to you by Supply Chain Digital Magazine, Procurement Magazine and BizClick. My name is Sean Ashcroft, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Digital. In the show, we bring you all the latest news, analysis, opinions and insight from the world of supply chain, procurement, logistics, right here on LinkedIn, but also on demand on YouTube and other digital platforms. My usual co-host, Procurement Magazine editor Ilkan Ozsevim, can't be with us today, but in his place, I'm delighted to welcome Helen Adams, one-time contributor to Supply Chain and currently editor of Manufacturing Digital and Healthcare Digital magazines. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. Now, just a quick reminder at this point for all of you watching, please do reach out to us in the comments section just below this show on your screen. If you haven't done so already, maybe you'd like to vote in our LinkedIn poll. On which note, Helen, what is our poll this week?
Thanks, Sean. Our poll for this week is, what are the biggest risks facing supply chains right now? Poor supplier performance, geopolitical uncertainty, labour shortages, or global economic volatility? What are your thoughts?
Sorry, Helen.
What are your thoughts?
Well, they're all big factors. And actually, the interesting thing is, for the first time, we put this poll both on supply chain and procurement LinkedIn pages, just to see if there's any disparity between the two sets of disciplines in how they, view these threats. So that'll be an interesting one to look out for later on. Anyway, so let's move on to news, shall we? So why don't you kick us off here, Helen? What have you spotted over the last few weeks that's caught your attention?
Sure. So there was the article, Actions for CPOs to Overcome Challenges in 2023, according to McKinsey. I'd like to talk about the practical steps the McKinsey article discussed. So as we all know, procurement continues to be buffeted by inflation, the war in Ukraine, the ongoing supply chain disruption, and it's just a very tough job all round. But here are a few of the top 10 practical steps listed by McKinsey as part of its resilience toolbox to help CPOs overcome some of the more serious challenges they face. So one is to run a 360-degree risk assessment around supply, suppliers, and costs. This, McKinsey says, will help CPOs see how events are affecting end-to-end supply chains and will also highlight the vulnerabilities that suppliers are subject to. Gaining real-time visibility, McKinsey points out that leading companies have set up a so-called resilience cockpit that provides real-time insight into customer demand, inventory, market pricing, and supply disruptions. Redefining portfolio and product design, CPOs are also urged to scrutinize product design to identify those that rely heavily on scarce materials and few suppliers. McKinsey gave us an example, a consumer packaged goods product manufacturer that used advanced analytics to make design changes that allowed the company to avoid out-of-stock disruptions, and that also helped offset cost inflation increases. Moving on from supply chain to procurement, what caught your eye in March, Sean?
Well, I'd like to chat about a story I wrote. I interviewed a chap called Skylar Chi, sure if that's how he pronounces his surname, but he's global head of enterprise accounts at Exeger, a company that helps clients through compliance and risk. Now, it was a piece about looking at food security, global food supply chains, and Chi said that actually you've got to look at the global food supply chain in the same way that you would look at a recipe, where it just has, a set number of ingredients, and each one, only works if they're all together. he explains that, that these ingredients, these inputs, are very sensitive to change. And he cited as an example, if Putin were to prevent all grain exports coming out of Ukraine, instead of just some grain exports, then that would have a catastrophic effect on food prices globally, even more so than it has already. Ukraine, of course, is one of the world's top grain producers. Now, he said if that were to happen, then the poorer nations would be disproportionately affected because they're far more reliant on grain exports from Ukraine than other nations. And they wouldn't really have the resources or wherewithal to switch to an alternative source of grain. And on a more general point about food supply chains, she went on to urge us consumers to help improve the situation with global food supply by reducing food waste, because waste is just one of the most damaging things in the food supply chain, both at source and at the point of consumption. And what he urged people to do was only eat seasonal produce, which is what everybody used to do before globalization. And I can even remember, you judged the seasons by whatever fruit was in your grocers. In winter it was Brussels sprouts and cabbage, and in the spring it was spring greens, and then as you get into the summer, it's all your usual sort of summer root vegetables. But now you can buy anything at any time, and the trouble is a lot of it is just shipped around the world out of season, ripened in the hulls of shipping containers using chemicals. And so it's not terribly sustainable. So a switch back to seasonal habits regionally would be a great help. So that was food supply chains and all the problems with that. So, well, anyway, back to you, Helen.
Thanks, Sean. That's food for thought. We're going to take a quick ad break. Don't go anywhere. We'll see you in a minute.
Wind River is working with Vodafone to enable the first commercial 5G O-RAN solution in Europe. My name is Kevin Dallas. I'm the CEO of Wind River. Wind River is a leader in intelligent edge software. Some of the iconic projects that our technology is being used in include the Mars rover, the James Webb Telescope, through to Airbus airplanes, and smart factories with companies like KUKA. At Wind River, we're strategizing around this future of telecommunications by enabling a new cloud-native Open RAN solution. This cloud-native Open RAN solution allows our customers to realize a disaggregated solution, which is the definition of O-RAN. Vodafone picked Wind River for their cloud-native O-RAN solution because Wind River is the only company that has delivered on a commercial network with Verizon in the US. Where do we see the needs of Open RAN going? In two areas: for consumers, delivering the high-performance, low-latency network for consumer scenarios, and finally, making sure that we deliver on the operational tools to drive operational efficiencies.
Welcome back. Now, you've probably already picked up that there's a risk theme to this month's show. And on that note, it's my pleasure now to introduce our guest, who is Brian Ulster. Brian is General Manager, North America, Finance and Risk for Dun & Bradstreet, the multinational company that provides commercial data, analytics, and insights for businesses. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And
glad to be here.
Brian is joining us from sunny Orlando. So, Brian, I was wondering if you could maybe just introduce our viewers to Dun & Bradstreet and just give a quick overview of what it is you do and how you help your clients?
Absolutely. So Dun & Bradstreet's a leading global provider. We provide business data and analytics to companies. We help businesses turn data into actionable insight. We help them solve challenges such as how do they accelerate revenue, how can they reduce costs, how can they manage risk, and drive overall transformation. And we do this by leveraging Dun & Bradstreet's data cloud, which contains information on over 500 million businesses around the globe.
Wow, that's a lot of businesses. And so what's your role there then, Brian?
Here at Dun & Bradstreet, I'm the general manager for our finance and risk solutions business, which really encompasses 3 different smaller businesses. First, we help customers in the lending space, whether they're extending credit or managing a risk portfolio, to mitigate risks in their portfolio and reduce expenses. We help procurement organizations and global sourcing organizations to solve supply chain disruption challenges and to reduce expenses. And we help companies to manage the burgeoning regulatory requirements that is pressed upon them around the world.
And you may have heard us chatting just earlier in the show about our reader poll, which was around risk in supply chain. And we talked about poor supplier performance, geopolitical uncertainty, labor problems, economic problems. In your experience, Brian, what are the major risks facing businesses and their supply chains in particular at the moment?
Yeah, there's several challenges that procurement and supply chain leaders have to face today. But I would say the top 3 probably start with inflation. Rising prices make it very difficult for companies to manage cash flows, which leads to lower profit margins. And not being able to understand what those rising prices are is a challenge for professionals in the supply chain space. The second is an unpredictable global economy. Companies have done a really good job adapting in the wake of so much disruption over the last 3 years. But one of the tactics that a lot of companies have started taking, especially with large global supply chains, is they started to overstock inventory to ensure they can meet demand. They didn't want to be caught without the ability to meet customer demand, like what happened in early 2021 when demand started to recharge the economy. Unfortunately, with recession looming, demand may wane, leaving companies with excess inventory, again leading to lower margins, another challenge for them. And then the third, I would probably say, is increasing regulatory burden. From new sanctions due to increasing geopolitical issues, like what we're seeing with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, all the way to expanded regulatory requirements, companies are struggling to keep up. In 2023, we expect to see increased ESG regulation as well, which most companies have typically not built into their supplier onboarding risk assessment processes yet. And so companies are trying to shift from their back foot, which is very reactive, more to their front foot, which is really challenging, especially in a supply chain and procurement and global sourcing environment where companies are trying to do more with the same or less resources.
And you help them with those challenges and issues, Brian. Could you maybe just give 1 or 2 examples of the kind of ways that you help businesses with those problems?
Yeah. There's really 4 key components to a successful supply chain program. First is they really need to develop a risk-based assessment process that helps companies can identify the potential supplier risk upfront during the onboarding process. That assessment process should include a review of a multitude of risks, including financial and credit health, cyber risk, ESG risk, sanctions, beneficial ownership to understand who the true ultimate owners are of a private entity. All this information is critical to understand upfront. The second part of this process is you can't just look at your immediate tier 1 suppliers. You must understand where the critical suppliers are, even if that's in your sub-tier supply chain, tier 2 or tier 3. So your suppliers' suppliers. Understanding the criticality of your sub-tier suppliers is really important to be able to illuminate. Today, most customers of ours have trouble looking at that second and third tier. Number 3 would be, once you've established an ongoing process to assess suppliers as you're onboarding them, and you're looking at multiple levels of your supply chain to identify those suppliers that are most critical, you then need to put a continuous monitoring program in place. And that continuous monitoring program ensures that you're continuously looking to see if the profile, the risk profile of those entities has changed. If it has changed, it'll help you form your decision as to whether or not you increase the amount of business you're doing with that company, you decrease the amount of business you're doing with that company, or you stop doing business with them altogether because the risk changed too much. The last part, which I think really helps companies shift from a reactive to a proactive environment, is being able to identify alternative suppliers of your most critical group of suppliers. If you have alternatives on hand and you're able to pivot quicker, you're never going to completely eliminate supply chain disruption, but you can proactively mitigate the impact it has on your profitability and your ability to maintain operations. So finding alternative suppliers is absolutely critical. Companies that take those 4 steps really are much more successful in being proactive versus reactive in this environment.
Thanks very much for that, Brian. So finally, and briefly, Brian, if I was going to, if you wanted, I mean, for any CEOs or senior executives watching this show, working for, medium to large company, what's the one message you'd like them to take away with, from this?
Yeah, I would say there's 2 things. 1, act with urgency. That means that you have to be able to invest in your processes to ensure that you can do more with the same or less resources. That usually means involving automating your data supply chain. So as your data is coming in, as you're seeing new suppliers or you're managing your existing suppliers, utilize a third party like Dun & Bradstreet to help drive data automation so that you can make decisions faster based on validated, accurate data in real time.
Well, sadly, Brian, that's all we've got time for now. But really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show, and wish you and Dun & Bradstreet all the very best.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So before we go any further, let's take a look at who is interacting with the show. So we've got a lot of people from the South American continent. I think some people are just waking up and tuning into the Supply Chain Show. Why not? We have Daniel from Sao Paulo, Brazil, and Luis from Sao Paulo, Brazil. Do you 2 know each other? Good morning to each of you. We also have Juan from Peru and Michelle from Brazil. So good morning to all of you and welcome. And also a lot of people from India. We have Jassi and Mubashir. Welcome to everyone from India, or I should say good evening. So we're quite global today, Sean.
We certainly are. We always are, Helen. So that's great. Thanks everybody for joining us and interacting with us. Now, usually at this point, we'd just dive straight into our magazines and just have a look at what's going on in our latest issues. But just before we do that, we're just going to have a quick chat about one of our other publications, which is the 2023 Top 100 Supply Chain Women that we published recently. So, I mean, this, if you haven't already, really urge you to take a look at this, because it makes for an inspiring read, and it's super insightful as well. So that's top 100 women in supply chain for 2023. But let's go on to our regular monthly magazines. There's a feature from April Procurement you'd like to tell us about, Hannah.
Thanks, Sean. So the feature I'd like to discuss is headlined Circular Economies Through Visibility and Collaboration. It's an interview with Alex Sarek, Chief Marketing Officer with Evalua, explaining the role procurement has to play in helping to bring about circular economies. Evalua helps businesses unlock strategic value from its spend and supply chain. Sarek explains that the circular economy creates greater efficiency across the supply chain, reducing the number of products that need to be manufactured from scratch. He points out that collaboration tools are key because they connect organizations, suppliers, and stakeholders, and that it is these kinds of networks that are a critical foundation for the circular economy. He says tools drive a smarter, more connected, visible, transparent, and collaborative approach are needed if procurement teams are to execute circular economy initiatives. And what about you, Sean? What feature from March supply chain would you like to highlight?
Well, the piece I'd like to chat about is a fascinating insight into a quite iconic laboratory in the States called the Los Alamos National Laboratory. It has a unique place in human history. So it's actually run under contract by the US Department of Energy, and it has a long history. It was actually the laboratory that was at the heart of the Manhattan Project in World War II, which, you know, is noted for the creation of the atomic bomb. So, you know, this laboratory was heavily involved in the creation of that bomb. But today it employs around 10,000 people, and it's based in Santa Fe in the high desert. It's incredibly remote. These days it works on everything from COVID-19 vaccine, genome sequencing, but it also retains its stewardship of the US nuclear weapons program. Now, over the past 18 months, the procurement function within the Los Alamos National Laboratory has undergone a transformation. And I spoke to the head of procurement there, Christine Hipp, and she talked me through all the digital systems that they have in place that help them with some of the extraordinary work that they do there. And their procurement systems, I mean, their procurement tasks and functions are pretty specialist. She told me of one recent project where they had to procure equipment, food and provisions for the crew of an Arctic exploration ship that was designed to sail into the deep Arctic and then be frozen in an ice floe for 18 months as it took, meteorological and aquatic readings, and it's like a floating research station. So they had to get that absolutely right. So they used their digital transformation to help them, fulfill these functions with more efficiency and make them more cost effective. So that was a really fascinating insight into, pretty extraordinary organization.
Amazing. Thank you, Sean. So back to our poll. Here's a quick reminder of the question. What are the biggest risks facing supply chains right now? And Sean, can you tell us the results?
Yes, so let's have a quick look. So we posted this poll on both our supply chain and procurement pages on LinkedIn, and they're actually fairly similar results. So I'll do it in ascending order. So poor supplier performance, supply chain gave that 9, but as you might expect, on the procurement side, they attached slightly more importance to that at 15%, but the other results were virtually identical. So I won't bother reading both of them out. I'll just do the supply chain ones. So next you have labor shortages, 13%, geopolitical uncertainty, 27%, and global economic volatility topping the pile by some distance, actually, with 51%. It was 46% on procurement. So, I mean, what do you make of that, Helen? I mean, I know we've had a little bit of comment as well, haven't we, from some of our followers?
Yes, we did. So OTAR Consulting said we should have had a fourth option that was just all of the above. That was what OTAR Consulting said. Plus lack of a documented roadmap.
Yes, and I think there was another LinkedIn supply chain follower, Seham Lewis, who's a graduate of supply chain management, as well as being a USAF veteran. And he talked about how economic volatility probably is the biggest risk right now because of inflation, and which bears out what most people are saying, I think. But as with all these polls, they're all interconnected.
Yes.
You can't separate out any one single thing. But there's just a lot of risk, as Brian was talking about earlier on. But anyway, sadly, that's all we got time for in this episode. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Thank you for interacting with us if watching live, and if taking part in the poll. Remember, the show is available on demand, so you can share it with colleagues or anyone interested in supply chain and procurement. So a big thank you to our special guest, Brian Alster of Dun & Bradstreet, to Ernie and the rest of the video production team, to Andy and the design team for the terrific looking magazines, and to Kaylee and the marketing team. This has been a BizClick production. We will be with you at the same time on the last Thursday of every month. So please make a note to join us for the next episode. See you next time. Thank you.